Well, thank you all, and good morning. I'm happy to be with you here today, and as he said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the library perspective, but I'm going to try also to speak more broadly about the perspective from the university itself, because our role in it as the university libraries is very much in support of the overall mission of the institution. So I wanted to share this slide and the next one because I think it helps to put in perspective the scale of what we're dealing with at a comprehensive research university. And I want to give you just a little background about the University of Florida. We are a comprehensive university, research university, but very heavy in STEM. We're doing over 7 years and on a trajectory to be at $1 billion within a couple of years. About 50% of our research is in the health sciences. We have a very large and complex health science program. 6 of our 16 colleges are in health fields. We're also a land-grant institution, so we're supporting agriculture and agriculture extension. This chart was developed for me by colleagues at Elsevier, and it has been very helpful to us in talking about this at the university. This is not comprehensively where publication is happening with University of Florida authors, but it's certainly the dominant journal families within which our authors are publishing. And it's an interesting way of looking at it. You can see why the initial collaboration I'm going to discuss is with Elsevier, because clearly, in terms of being the single largest publisher with whom our faculty are dealing, Elsevier is the largest. But you can see we also have a very large amount of publishing going on with Wiley and Springer and a range of other publishers. So I think it's helpful to kind of understand that most universities will have a similar array of authors they're dealing with and sources through which those authors are publishing. Another interesting aspect of UF publishing is that the diversity of subjects, again, because we're a comprehensive university, and that's represented in the pie chart, but also that we're averaging 7,000 to 8,000 scholarly articles a year that are being published. This isn't counting monographs. This isn't counting other kinds of things that our faculty are doing. We have a fairly high impact in our publishing. If you look at the one in the lower left corner, you'll see that over 20% of our publications of our articles show up among the 10% most cited. So that's a really nice number, a nice average. And 2.5% to 3% show up in the 1% most cited. So we are a university whose publishing has impact, and that's been very important to the university and also to our faculty. I borrowed this slide from Howard Ratner. He's aware of my plagiarism and graciously allowed me to adapt it. He used a variation of this slide at SSP last year, and I'll explain the changes that I've made, one of which is he did have compliance as the central word in the slide. I bolded it and made it much bigger because I think we are all very concerned about identification, discovery, preservation, and access, but the bottom line in a lot of ways for the university comes to compliance. And when he used this slide last year, the missing element was the central bottom VP of research. And I went up to him afterwards and said to him, when I look at the 5 parties of interest that you represent here, the one that's missing is the one on my campus who loses sleep at night over these policies, and that's the vice president of research. And so we took the license of adding the VP research, and then interestingly enough, if you look at it, then 3 of the 6 parties of interest are all coming from the academic institution. So clearly my faculty have enormous interest in their publishing, dissemination of their content. As the Dean of Libraries, I have a lot of concern about providing content to them for their research and then helping the Division of Sponsored Research manage that, and have been asked repeatedly if I can't help with this compliance. You know, can't the library solve this problem for us is what I have been told several times by the provost, the Division of Sponsored Research, the Dean of our Research Council. You know, it's sort of an interesting conversation as though it were a magic wand that I could wave. So what are our interests and concerns at the university? Certainly, we want very broad access to the university research results. I don't think there's any part of the community that doesn't see that as a very important goal. We're very concerned that that dissemination is done in a manner that ensures compliance with funder mandates. Very concerned, at least on the part of the Division of Sponsored Research, about the negative impact of a failure to comply in terms of limiting our access to research funding. I think the Division of Sponsored Research and the library share a concern about minimizing the administrative burden on the authors. And the authors would be the first ones to tell you that they're very important and very busy, and being asked to do lots of different things, and anything that we can do that simplifies that is much to be sought after. We really do have a common interest in retaining author and university rights to the intellectual and scholarly contributions of our faculty. We know that we and others build on that research, and we want to be able to take that into the classroom and into the lab and to continue to use it. And clearly, all of this is sort of as a subtext of wanting to enhance the prestige and reputation of individual faculty members, but also of the university as a whole. Our faculty are numerous, well over 7,000 of them. Sometimes I think there are as many or more opinions as there are faculty members on these issues. I think aspirationally, I would be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't strongly believe in open access, but the devil is in the details. And as soon as we start looking at the practical implementation of it, lots of questions begin to arise about what the burden is that comes back on them and how we can reduce that burden. So they also are very much motivated by the desire to publish in the best and most appropriate journal, and often very unconcerned about what rights they're signing away in the process of doing that. Often completely oblivious to embargoes, unable to tell you whether they held back or gave away rights. That's not what their focus is at the point of publication. They want to get the article out, and generally by the time they're publishing, they're already into the next research project, so they're really working on yesterday's news, and mentally they're in the lab doing something else. So we do have a very active institutional repository at the University of Florida. We call it the University of Florida Digital Collections. I've got 3 examples here of an article from a group of our faculty, and actually there's at least one outside author in this group too. We're working on a project with Elsevier that I wanted to talk briefly about today to harvest the metadata and the full text of articles for which one or more authors are UF affiliated, historically and then on an ongoing basis into the future. We want to be sure that we have that information in the institutional repository and searchable. And this is an example of one that happens to be an open access article that the author, who happens to be the chair of the University Library Committee, himself deposited. So you're seeing a PDF file of it here on this screen. But this is how the article would appear if it were searched in the university repository. We also use Summon as a discovery tool, and so many people who would be searching information from the university would be finding themselves being drawn in by Summon, and you can see that this gives a very different view of it. There's a different image. There's additional information on the right-hand side that gives more descriptive information about the article. And then finally, the inevitable Google search. So in each of these searches, using Jeffrey Roth's name and the words prenatal risk, I'm going to find as a user that I'm brought to the same place, and the place that we would like to be brought and that our faculty members would like to be brought is to the published journal article. So the agreement that we have with Elsevier is that we will put this metadata, including the full text, so it's full text searchable, in the IR, and that when someone actually comes to the article in that manner and selects it, if they are licensed at any institution that gives them rights to access Elsevier, it will go directly to the Elsevier platform, which then does give them these referrals on the side to other related articles and gives them access to other data, and is the final published version. Part of what convinced us that this was a good thing to do was the altmetrics that I mentioned. Our faculty really want significant impact factor. So citations obviously a part of that, but part of it is the usage and aggregating the usage on the single platform and having that usage reported back gives more weight and more impact to that article than having some of the access through the IR and some of it through other sources. So the process that we're following will do that, will help us drive toward that. And what we've been working with Elsevier about is how do we deal with the small percentage of users at this point, but that come to search for this article and don't have a license and therefore don't pass through automatically. Obviously, if it's an open access article, as this one was, all users would have passed through. But for others that aren't open access, they will be given options for how they can access the content, and we've asked that Elsevier include within those options identification of interlibrary loan as a way for them to receive it, so that there are some free options. But this really is our preferred destination, and the way it would be handled in our institutional repository, the analogy we use is like YouTube. Very often on a website, if you see a link to seeing a video, when you click on it, that link is not actually content on the website. It's actually going out and pulling the content in from YouTube. And that's what would happen, in effect, in the institutional repository. If they click on the link to the article, it would pull the results from the Elsevier platform rather than our hosting those results locally. So it's a more cost-effective solution for us, and it does keep the content current in terms of any corrections or changes that may be later made. We will be working very closely with our Division of Sponsored Research to analyze that information, to do text mining and other kinds of things where we want to look at that as a collected subset of works of the University of Florida. We will be working with them to assure that there is deposit in appropriate places. I hadn't really paid attention to how many of those numbers there really are in terms of those policies, so maybe I've overcommitted. But the idea is that one of the roles of the library is to sort of be the funnel. If an article needs to be deposited in 3 different places, that we can work with the Division of Sponsored Research to make sure that happens, rather than relying on the faculty to know specifically, I have to do this for this one and that for that one, and forgetting perhaps that there was a third one. If we're going to have compliance, we want it to be proactive, and again, as much as possible to minimize the burden on the faculty member. So we're hoping that this pilot that we're doing with Elsevier will be extensible, and that other publishers will begin to use this as a best practice, and that if you think back to that first slide with the bubbles on it, that at some point in time for all the major publishers, we would have an automatic method of knowing that an article has been submitted by a UF author and then beginning to manage it and deal with it without relying on each faculty member to remember to tell us that they've published or are seeking to publish. So that's kind of a very quick summary of what we are doing at UF and kind of the perspective on why we're approaching it in the way we are. And I'll turn it back to you, and then I think we're taking questions at the end.
Yeah, we'll do questions at the end. So
okay.
we can get through everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.